Thank you, Mr. Holloway. It's always a pleasure to be under your chairmanship. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Whately, for securing this very important debate today. Also grateful for the insights and contributions of the honourable gentleman for Leeds North West and Strangford, and indeed for the front bench contributions. And I'll endeavour to answer all the questions, and those that I don't, I will obviously do so in writing subsequently. Now, this year marks the 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the UK and Indonesia. I'm very pleased to say that the relationship is flourishing. Indonesia is an important democratic partner in the G20 and for the next 2 years on the UN Security Council. It's in this context, of course, that we follow very seriously the situation in Papua. We welcome President Joko Widodo's commitment to a peaceful and prosperous Papua. However, we also recognise the challenges, the historic challenges, are significant. Many stem, of course, from the disputes over resources and governance referred to by my honourable friend in his first speech, and from unresolved human rights grievances. Whilst the UK government wholeheartedly respects the territorial integrity of Indonesia, with the province of Papua and West Papua as integral parts, it is, I think, important that within this framework the authorities address the needs and aspirations of the Papuan people. We are concerned by the sporadic outbreaks of violence in Papua and by reports of alleged human rights violations by the security forces. We do and will continue to press the Indonesian authorities to strengthen their human rights protection and to address the legitimate concerns of the people, including by ensuring that they benefit from sustainable and equitable development. And indeed, the issues raised by the Honourable Lady for Bishop Auckland in relation to the building of a civic society that allows free political parties. There are serious and long-standing concerns about the influence and actions of the Indonesian security forces in Papua. And I believe, and I know that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office believes, that it is regrettable that despite improvements since the restoration of democracy in Indonesia in 1998, there remain persistent reporting of worrying human rights violations in Papua. Meanwhile, there has been no real accountability for the serious abuses of the past. When I met with the Indonesian ambassador to London in January, I raised these issues with him, not least because I very recently had a meeting with the all-party group. And in light of the contemporary violence in Ndunga, where armed groups had attacked construction workers, resulting in the deaths of 19 people. We urged the authorities in Indonesia then to ensure that any security response would be proportionate. Under successive democratically elected governments, there has been, as has been rightly, and I think rightly in university recognised, a noticeable improvement in the overall human rights situation across Indonesia as a whole, and an end to the very debilitating conflicts in East Timor, in Aceh, in Ambon and elsewhere. Now, during their recent phone call, the UK Prime Minister praised the President of Indonesia for the peaceful conduct of the presidential and legislative elections in April, which represented the single largest one-day democratic event anywhere in the world, with some 80% voter turnout and more than 800,000 polling stations operating across the archipelago. Whilst there were some localised delays to polling, including in Papua, there has, in my view, been no evidence to suggest that this has been anything other than a well-run and credible election. Nevertheless, I can say to the House that we shall continue to raise our concerns about issues such as freedom of expression and assembly, as well as the rights of persons belonging to minorities. Now, in reference to media freedom in Papua, brought up by a number of members here, UK officials regularly raise the importance of media access to Papua with the Indonesian government, and we will continue to do so. Our embassy in Jakarta is active in promoting press freedom across the entirety of Indonesia, where there is already a vibrant media environment. To mark World Press Freedom Day last week, the embassy arranged a full programme of activities to celebrate the work of Indonesia's journalists, media organisations and regulators in this regard. However, whilst President Jokowi has said that foreign journalists should be allowed access to Papua without preconditions, unfortunately, we also understand that Indonesian officials continue to place substantial practical obstacles in the way of this taking place. Transparency and media access are important to give us all a fuller picture of the situation. And we also encourage all Indonesian journalists to write openly and frankly about Papua to ensure that all local perspectives are properly heard and are part of that debate. Now, on the point made by my honourable friend for Whitney about the Defend Media Freedoms panel, this panel has not yet had its first meeting, as we understand, but it will be for its members to determine its work and plan the initial areas of focus. It would, of course, not be appropriate for the UK government to seek to dictate these, as in many ways I think it would undermine that sense of independence that is important. But we also regularly press for the release of political prisoners across Papua. Under President Jokowi, the number has fallen from 37 in 2014 to fewer than 10 today. Now, both Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have acknowledged this positive trend, but we continue to make the case that 10 political prisoners remains 10 too many. However, we are concerned that 3 people charged with treason in January 2019, having apparently taken part in a peaceful prayer event. We call here and now for all political prisoners to be released immediately and for the Indonesian authorities to ensure that all detainees are given the right to a fair trial. We will continue to request updates on the historic human rights cases in Papua that I think President Jokowi has committed to resolve, and we will keep that pressure up in the aftermath of the elections. Initial investigations have been conducted by the National Commission on Human Rights, but these need to be properly dealt with by the Attorney General's office. May I turn just briefly to the issue on phosphorus, and I am happy to have further conversations with both the Honourable Lady for Bishop Auckland and the Honourable Gentleman for Leeds North West on this issue. I have to say that our own investigations have not substantiated the media claims that it was used in violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. As was rightly pointed out, it is prohibited in all cases against civilians. Therefore, we do not believe there is a case for referral to the OPCW. But I am more than happy to look at any further additional written or other evidence that the Honourable Gentleman has on this matter. And clearly, we will be happy then to take this matter up. As has been pointed out, President Jokowi has visited Papua 10 times during his first term, far more than any previous Indonesian president. He's made a number of important democratic commitments, including to establishing a constructive political dialogue with Papuan groups. This process represents, I think, a credible opportunity to address long-held grievances, and our discussions with the Indonesian government, we will urge them to deliver on these commitments. I very much hope that the recent sad but peaceful passing of Pastor Neles Teba, the Papuan priest who has been at the forefront of attempts to create a peaceful dialogue on the future of Papua, might inspire progress to honour his legacy, led by the team that the President has appointed to foster a dialogue. I agree that the Act of Free Choice was an utterly flawed process, but I have to say to my honourable friend for Whitney and indeed to the House that there is no desire in the international community for reopening this question. The UK, along with other members of the UN, very much supports Indonesia's territorial integrity. We will continue to support efforts by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and her officials to arrange this visit to Papua at the invitation of the Indonesian government. Officials in our embassy in Jakarta have discussed this proposed visit with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and encourage Indonesia to agree dates as soon as possible. I will also undertake now to raise this proposed visit with my Indonesian counterparts, and I hope to make a visit, a quite substantially long visit to Indonesia later in the year. Facilitating the visit to Papua, I think, would help the Indonesian government demonstrate their commitment to the rights and freedoms of those residing in Papua. It would also help underline the seriousness with which they take their candidacy for a seat on the Human Rights Council. And as I say, as a member of the UN Security Council, it also provides an opportunity for us to speak fairly openly at New York on this issue. Mr. Colburn, it is clear that economic factors are a major source of grievance amongst the Papuan people and a source of strain in their relationship with the central government and local authorities. That's why we shall continue to support Indonesia's regional governments to develop a green economy in which people can make a living without over-exploiting their natural resources, and in which there is greater regulatory oversight of the timber industry, which of course has been so fundamentally linked to this social conflict. Let me end, Mr. Holoban, by saying this. This government will continue to take a close interest in human rights in Papua. I'm very pleased there are a number of MPs who are very passionate about this I very much enjoy their passion. I think it provides us with the opportunity of making a serious case to our Indonesian counterparts, which we will do. And above all, we think that this expression of interest is in the interest of all the people of Papua and indeed for the rest of Indonesia.